Jake, elevator pitch us Shogun. Tell us why it's the best thing in the world, which I know you're so excited about.
Yeah, so people have been asking me to build a hyperdeflationary token for a long time. And so I've had the pleasure of looking at all the builders and seeing what worked, what didn't work. And one thing that really sparked my eye was Element 280. So for the people that don't know Element 280, it's essentially a token that gets paired with everything in the ecosystem. So it has over 20 plus pairs. But the cool thing that exists on the blockchain is you have these things called arbitrage bots. So when you have a token that exists on 20 different pairs, the way Uniswap works is every pair has its own price. So you can have a token that trades at $1 in one pair, and then $1.20 in the other pair, because when people buy and sell in this one pair, it doesn't impact the price of the other. So there are these things called arbitrage bots that will, in this case, the $1 pool and the $1.20 pool, it will buy in the $1 pool and sell in the $120 pool, and it will kind of cancel out at $1.10 or $1.05. But they're price fixing bots. Might be a better word than arbitrage bots. Now, what I noticed with Element 280, so it existed in 20 pairs, and this is going to play a massive part in Shogun. So Element 280 had $3 million a day in volume during its distribution phase, which I think was 28 days. I did the math. 70% of that volume, so 2.1 million, was arbitrage bots, price fixer bots, that fixed all the prices across all the pools. Now, the cool thing is Shogun is going to utilize that. So Shogun, a big part of the Shogun design is going to be the price fixing bot, because Shogun is going to have starting 30 pairs all within the TitanX ecosystem. So we're not going to pair with stuff outside of the ecosystem because we want to contain the volume within, also for Titan farms, etc. But it's going to start with roughly 30 pairs, and then in the future we can also start adding X28 pairs, so it might go up to 60 plus ecosystem pairs. So the bots are constantly going to be fixing prices. So Shogun will have an 8% tax. What happens with that tax is half of that tax gets burned. So in this example, if 50% gets burned, if we have the same volume as Element 280 had during its distribution phase, because a lot of the volume, if you just create pairs, it doesn't automatically magically create volume. You need high adoption and high activity for all the prices to go out of whack in all the pairs. So we know how to bring high adoption. That's easy. So we want to utilize it with Shogun. So if we have $2.1 million of arbitrage volume or price fixing volume, that means $1 million of Shogun will get burned a day, just through arbitrage bots alone. That's the math. So that's the idea behind the tax. Now, the cool thing about Shogun is the way it's going to come into existence is it's going to be an auction system. So there's going to be 2.8 billion supply plus 100 million minted to create all the liquidity pairs. So 100 million for liquidity pairs, and then 2.8 billion is going to be user distributed over 28 days. So 100 million a day over 28 days. That's the only supply that will exist, and it will only go down from there. So it's a 28-day distribution event for Shogun. The way people can go into the auction for Shogun is there's two options. And one of the options only exists for the first 28 days. So the first option is they go in with Liquid X28, which is essentially just TitanX, Omnichain TitanX. They go in with Liquid X28, and they essentially enter the auction to get the Shogun tokens for that day, that 24-hour window. And then the other option is people can also enter with TitanX stakes. So to give an example with TitanX stakes, if you have a stake that has 22 billion TitanX, if you want to take that stake into the TitanX auction, you also need to come in with 22 billion liquid TitanX. We needed to do that, otherwise it breaks the mechanics, because when you burn a stake, there's no buy and burn that happens across the pairs, etc. So we needed the liquid so that we can route through the pairs and break the X28 so arbitrage ceiling. So for the mechanics to work, it needs to be stake plus liquid. So when you enter with a stake, 22 billion staked, you also need 22 billion liquid. And then that liquid is going to buy X28, burn a percentage of X28, buy Shogun, burn Shogun. And that is only going to be available for the first 28 days. So after the distribution event is over, you will not be able to enter with TitanX stakes anymore. Also to make the user experience simpler. Because if it's just like, hey, liquid X28, enter the auction with this, it gets rid of a ton of questions and makes adoption simpler. But people have been wanting to do this for a long time. So for the first 28 days, you're going to be able to enter with TitanX stakes plus TitanX liquid. After the 28 days, that's cut off, and it's only liquid X28. But during the first 28 days, you can also enter just with liquid X28. Just for the people that have stakes, that's also another way to enter. So that's the supply distribution. Now, the cool part of it is 8% of the TitanX that comes in and the X28 that comes in goes towards a liquidity wallet. That's going to create liquidity pairs with everything in the ecosystem and then burn the LP tokens. So you're going to be able to see on-chain the LP tokens getting burned. So it's essentially forever locked liquidity. So Shogun will create pairs with everything in the ecosystem, every single token in the ecosystem, which creates another interesting kind of tertiary effect. because the way because it's going to be Uniswap v2 pair, because taxes only work on Uniswap v2. All the fees get accrued into the pool. So like on Uniswap v3, when you provide liquidity, you can take your fees out, keep your liquidity position in. On Uniswap v2, it's automatically accrued in the position, meaning that the fees essentially become semi-locked. So as Shogun pushes volume through all of these pairs to the price fixing bots, that is going to lock all the fees of all these built on TitanX ecosystem tokens into the pool. So it essentially becomes a supply sink for all the tokens that exist within the Shogun pairs. So this is going to do a lot. It's going to push X28 above its arbitrage ceiling all the time, 24/7 nonstop, which is going to burn TitanX supply, create X28 supply. People use X28 to enter Shogun. 20% of the X28 also gets burned that enters Shogun. And then it's going to create massive volume across the ecosystem, which is then going to feed Shogun $1 million a day in burn volume. The other 50% of that goes towards this thing called the war chest. So what the Shogun war chest is essentially the perpetual auctions, very similar to Vault. So the way it works is it's going to get that supply essentially off of market. It's not inflation. So there's the auctions that happen after the 28 days come from supply that comes off market. So a percentage of the buy and burn also goes towards the war chest, and a percentage of the tax also goes towards the war chest. And that's just going to endlessly feed the ecosystem with buy and burn volume and volume throughout the ecosystem, which is going to constantly kickstart arbitrage bots because the prices are going to be so out of whack with all the volume happening.